Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salawatullahil Barrir Rahim. على سيدنا وحبيبنا وعظيمنا وقائدنا وقرة أعيننا محمد المصطفى المرتضى المجتبى وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تلا. قال المؤلف رحمه الله. Said the author, may Allah have mercy upon him. وما هو الأصلح للعبد فليس ذلك بواجب على الله تعالى. Whatever is in the slave's greatest welfare, or whatever is most advantageous for the slave, is not God's duty. Exalted is He. SharH, the explanation. هذا رد على المعتزلة. This is a refutation of the Mu'tazila. So we're still talking about the Mu'tazila ever since the author started talking about destiny and its offshoot cases of believing that slaves create their own deeds and that the slave is creator of whatever results from his deeds, and believing that the slave has the power to do something before he does it, and believing that the forbidden is not sustenance from God. Anything forbidden is not sustenance from God. And here's another case of theirs. They believe that what is best for the slave is God's duty. And this is part of their atheism, because Mu'tazila are atheists. Yani, they are a type of atheist. One might not think they were atheists because they say God exists. But they just say God exists, and they say what is contrary to that, though. They say what negates that. And what they say that negates God's existence is what they really believe. So they are a type of atheist. And they're saying that God exists is some formality or some sort of wordplay they have. Yani, or something they have to, it will explain it in some way. But this is the creed of the atheist, that God has the duty to do what's best for the slaves. Meaning, the atheist, he says, if there were a God, then how is it that there's evil in the world and poverty in the world, and so his belief is that if there were a God, then he would only do what's best for the slaves. He would only create the good. لأنهم قالوا واجب على الله أن يفعل بالعبد ما هو الأصلح له. Because they say it is God's duty to do what is best for the slave. قال التفتزاني. التفتزاني said, وإلا لما خلق الكافر أي له الكافر الفقير المعذب في الدنيا والآخرة. At-Taftazani said, had what's best for the slaves been God's duty, then he would not have created an impoverished, tortured disbeliever. An impoverished disbeliever tortured in this world and in the next world. Yani, look at the low status this one has. He's a kafir, the lowest status he can have. And Allah made him poor. A poor kafir. Subhanallah. So he has low status. And then he's going to be tortured. Yani, let's say he was tortured in this dunya. Somehow Allah created that circumstance for him. And then in the afterlife, Allah will torture him. Then this proves that what is best for the slaves is not God's duty to create. وَلَمَا كَانَ لَهُ مَنَّةٌ عَلَى الْعِبَادِ وَاسْتِحْقَاقُ شُكْرٍ فِي الْهِدَايَةِ. And had creating what's most advantageous for the slave been God's duty, then he would not have any grace over the slaves. And he would not be deserving of thanks for guidance. وَإِفَاضَةِ أَنْوَاعِ الْخَيْرَاتِ, and he would not be deserving of thanks for his bestowal of all sorts of endowments. لِكَوْنِهَا أَدَاءً لِلْوَاجِبِ, because if what is best for the slaves is God's duty, then his doing this is something that he is supposed to do. So why would he deserve thanks? And sometimes you do something that you're supposed to do, then maybe someone would say thank you to you. But what if he doesn't say thank you to you? When you do what you're supposed to do, you paid your debt. It's your obligation. So what if he didn't say thank you? Is he ungrateful to you? You were supposed to do it. Well, he might say thank you out of courtesy, though. So had creating what's best for the slaves been God's duty, then he wouldn't be deserving of thanks. He would have just been doing what he's supposed to do. ولما كان امتنانه على النبي عليه السلام فوق امتنانه على أبي جهل. And had God been obligated to do what's best for the slave, then God's bestowal upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would not be superior to his bestowal upon Abu Jahl, one of the worst blasphemers ever. إذ فعل الله لكل منهما غاية مقدوره من الأصلح له, because according to their creed, Allah did for both of them what he could do. غاية مقدوره, that's blasphemy in itself there, because his power has no limit. غاية مقدوره, according to them, Allah did the very best he could do for each one. Yani, that is their creed. They say it is God's duty to do what is best for the slaves. So then they're going to have to explain how all the bad circumstances people have are the best for them. But if it were his duty to do what's best for the slaves, and according to the Mu'tazila, he actually did his duty, then the endowment upon the Prophet would not be greater than the endowment upon Abu Jahl, because لِكُلٍّ مِّنْهُمَا إِذْ فَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِكُلٍّ مِّنْهُمَا غَايَةَ مَقْدُورِهِ مِنَ الْأَصْلَحِ لَهُ, because then, according to their creed, Allah would have done the best he could do in granting them what's best for them. أي فيما يدعي المعتزلة, meaning according to what the Mu'tazila claim. ولما كان لسؤال العصمة والتوفيق وكشف الضراء والبسط في الخصب والرخاء معنى. And had it been God's duty to do what's best for the slaves, then it would be meaningless to ask God for protection and to ask him for compliance, to grant you compliance, and to ask him to relieve your calamities, and to ask him to expand your commodities. That would be meaningless. لأن ما لم يفعله في حق كل واحد فهو مفسدة له يجب على الله تركه. Because anything that he did not do concerning each individual would then be worse for him. According to their creed, anything that Allah did not do for a slave is worse for that slave. This is a very stupid creed. And it's obligatory on God to abandon that. It's his duty. أي عندهم واجب على الله أن يفعل بكل شخص ما هو الأصلح له. Meaning that according to them, it is obligatory, it is God's duty to do for each person whatever is best for him. ولما بقي في قدرة الله بالنسبة إلى مصالح العباد شيء. And according to their creed, there wouldn't be anything left that God could do even better for his slaves. And that's against an ayah from the Quran. Allah says,
لهم ما يشاءون فيها ولدينا مزيد.
they have therein in the garden whatever they want, and we have more. Yani, they have in the garden, yani, whatever they want. So they are completely satisfied, and Allah can give them more. So, according to the creed of the Mu'tazila, there's not more that God could do for the slave because he had to already do the best that he could do for the slave. إِذْ قَدْ أَتَى بِالْوَاجِبِ, because according to them, God has done his duty. وَلَعَمْرِي إِنَّ مَفَاسِدَ هَذَا الْأَصْلِ أَعْنِي وجوب الأصلح بل أكثر أصول المعتزلة أظهر من أن يخفى. And yani, I swear, the corruption of this fundamental, I mean, believing that God has a duty to do what's best for the slaves. In fact, most of the fundamental creeds of the Mu'tazila, the corruption of most of the fundamental creeds of the Mu'tazila is too obvious to hide. وأكثر وأكثر من أن يحصى, and too abundant to enumerate. وذلك لقصور نظرهم في المعارف الإلهية, and that is due to their, and this is a rough translation here, that is due to their deficient comprehension of understanding Godhood. That is due to their deficient understanding, their deficient comprehension of Godhood. ورسوخ قياس الغائب على الشاهد في طباعهم, and it is due to their being obsessed with comparing what was never experienced to something experienced. Yani, because they are obsessed with assumptions and theories. These Mu'tazila. وهذا تقريب وبيان وهذا تقريب وبيان مقالاتهم وبيان السخافة التي اتصفوا بها. So intaha, end quote. We were quoting at Taftazani. The Shaykh says, this is an approximation and a clarification of what they say. And it is an exposure of the stupidity with which these people are described. Yani, these are people who feign intelligence. One would think that they're intelligent or very bright. So it's interesting that a person could work his mind, he could put his mind into overdrive and come to very massive blunders. ثم قال التفتزاني, then التفتزاني said, وغاية تشبثهم في ذلك أن ترك الأصلح يكون بخلا وسفها. And the extent, At-Taftazani said, the extent of their hard-headedness in this is for them to say that for God to not do what is best for the slave is miserliness and foolishness. So that's their atheism right there. Because that's how atheists feel about God. Atheists deny the existence of God, and then if they were to suppose the existence of God, they would say that God is a miser and God is a fool, and etc., etc. وأجاب أهل الحق عن هذه الشبهة. The people of the truth responded to this fallacy. بأن هذا لا يكون بخلا من الله وسفها. That this, which is not doing what's best for the slave is not miserliness from God, nor is it foolishness. لأنه حكيم في أفعاله, because God is wise in his doings, all of them. And what's the wisdom from God? The wisdom from God is making everything as it is. The hikmah is the qadar, because the qadar is making everything as it is. And the hikmah is making everything as it is. How is that wisdom? How is making everything as it is wisdom? For God it is. Because when God makes something, it came out the way he willed for it to come out. Yani, it came out the right way, with the meaning that he never makes a mistake in how he makes something. So anyone who never makes a mistake in what he does then is definitely wise. For the slaves, you're going to gauge their created wisdom by their by their mistakes and their accuracies. ثم ليست كل حكمة تظهر لعباده. Furthermore, not every wisdom appears for God's slaves. They don't always know God's wisdom behind something, or a wisdom behind something. بل منها ما يدركونه ومنها ما لا يدركونه. Rather, some things they realize its wisdom, and other things they do not realize its wisdom. هذا معنى ما أورده التفتزاني في رد شبهتهم. This is what At-Taftazani produced in refuting their fallacy. وَنَصُّهُ فِي الْجَوَابِ الَّذِي أَوْرَدَهُ, and his verbatim quote in his answer, his response that he produced is إِنَّ مَنْعَ مَا يَكُونُ حَقَّ الْمَانِعِ الَّذِي قد ثبت بالأدلة القاطعة كرمه وحكمته ولطفه وعلمه بالعواقب يكون محض عدل وحكمة له. He said, indeed, preventing what a preventer has the right to do, what a preventer has the right to prevent, preventing what a preventer has the right to prevent, a preventer's right to prevent, that's confirmed by definitive evidence. Preventing what a preventer has the right to prevent, as confirmed by definitive evidence, is karamuhu. So karam, I'm not sure what's Taftazani's intent by the word karam here, because karam could mean generosity. So I don't know if that's what he meant there, because he's discussing here God's withholding something, and usually generosity means giving something. So also karam could mean nobility, greatness. So I don't know, what does he mean by karam here? So At-Taftazani said, indeed, the prevention of what a preventer has the right to prevent, that prevention which is confirmed by definitive evidence, is karam, is God's karam. Wa hikmatuhu, and his wisdom. Wa lutfuhu. Lutf, yani what I know as explanation of the lutf of Allah is his mercy and his rahmah and his ra'fah. وَعِلْمُهُ بِالْعَوَاقِبِ, and it is his knowledge of outcomes. That means a result of. It is his knowledge of outcomes, meaning it is a result of his knowledge of outcomes. يَكُونُ مَحْضَ عَدْلٍ, it will be pure justice, mere unadulterated justice. وَحِكْمَةً لَهُ, and wisdom of his. انتهى, end quote. أي أن هذا المنع يكون في حقه محض العدل والحكمة وَلَيْسَ مِنَ السَّفَهِ وَالْبُخْلِ. Meaning that this prevention would be, when it comes to God being the preventer, pure justice, mere, unadulterated justice and wisdom. And it would not be foolishness nor miserliness. So we say, really, the Mu'tazila believe that God is a fool and a miser. They would say, we don't believe God is a fool and a miser. But they do believe that God's a fool and a miser because they believe that if he does not do what's best for the slaves, then he would be a fool and a miser. They say, yeah, and he does what's best for the slaves. But in reality, we know he doesn't do what's best for the slaves always. So that's why, in reality, they do believe that God is a fool and a miser. That's blasphemy. And that's atheism. That's how you cut through persons' games and you get to the bottom of something. ثم قال التفتزاني. Then التفتزاني said, ثم ليت شعري. I wish I knew. ما معنى وجوب الشيء على الله تعالى? What does it mean to say that God has a duty? Yeah, that means it's meaningless to say that God has a duty. إذ ليس معناه استحقاق تاركه الذم. Because it does not mean that the one who doesn't do it is blameworthy. وهو ظاهر, and that's obvious. ولا لزوم صدوره عنه بحيث لا يتمكن من الترك بناء على استلزامه محالا. I don't know how to translate this. So I'll have to ask, inshallah, about this statement here. All of that. And not the last sentence here. The last sentence, he says, وَمَيْلٌ إِلَى الْفَلْسَفَةِ الظَّاهِرَةِ الْعَوَارِ. He says, this position of the Mu'tazila is an inclination towards the invalid philosophy which is invalid. Rough translation there. Because that's the case of the Mu'tazila. What did they do? They were argumentative people who believed that the mind is an authority in the religion. So this is inclinations towards philosophy in itself, because creed of the philosopher, fundamental creed of any philosopher, is that the mind is the authority. And the philosopher believes that he can decipher anything by the mind merely, with enough application. Now, those old philosophers, the Greek ones, they were from before Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I think they're from before Prophet Isa even, alayhi salatu wassalam. Those famous ones. When the Islamic Empire expanded, and it was still young, just, let's say, inside of 200 years after the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, the books of the Greeks got translated into Arabic, and then the Arabs got exposed, and the Muslims, the Arabs and the Muslims, because Arabic was the Islamic language, official religious language. The Muslims became exposed to their philosophy. And Shaykh Kamal Hout taught us that when the Muslims wanted to translate their books into Arabic, and they went to those people, those Roman people, to translate their books. I don't have any references for this. I'm just telling you what I learned from one of the teachers. Those people, those Romans or Greeks or whatever they were, at first they didn't want to accept for the Muslims to translate their stuff. Or some of them didn't. But others, they said, no, let them translate it. It will put poison into their conviction. They knew. So they let them translate it. And that's what happened. And so what did the Mu'tazila do? They indulged in this falsafah philosophy, and they basically updated it. They built on it. And they introduced many bad ideas into the Islamic stream. وقد ذكر تاج الدين السبكي في طبقاته عن أبي الحسن الأشعري أنه ناظر أبا علي الجبائي. And Tajuddin as-Subki, he mentioned in his Tabaqat, his book on the levels of the Shafi'is. He has a book called Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyyah. Tabaqat means levels, in which he mentions the Shafi'i scholars, amongst whom he documents is Al-Bukhari and Muslim. Someone says to you, if Wahhabi says to you, is Bukhari a Shafi'i? Is Muslim a Shafi'i? For Muslim, you can say, yeah, Muslim was a Shafi'i. And as for Al-Bukhari, he's counted amongst the Shafi'is, and it's said that he became an absolute mujtahid. So according to a saying, Al-Bukhari had his own madhab. And in fact, his book of Sahih is an elucidation of his madhab, not merely a hadith book. So Tajuddin as-Subki mentioned in his Tabaqat, his book about the levels of the Shafi'is, on Abi al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, from, he logged about him, about Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, أنه ناظر أبا علي الجبائي, that he debated with Abu Ali al-Jubba'i, al-Jubba'i, who was his uncle or his stepfather. It's not impossible that he's both of them, because it's possible for a woman to marry the brother of her ex-husband, like if her husband died, for example, or her husband divorced her. فقال له الأشعري, so Al-Ash'ari said to him, and so if you want, ask about that so you can get clarity, because I learned that Al-Jubba'i was his uncle, and I learned that Al-Jubba'i was, it was said also, he's his stepfather. So what's going on there? Those two are not contradictory, so what's the case there? So Al-Ash'ari said to Al-Jubba'i, ما قولك في ثلاثة? What do you say about three? مؤمن وكافر وصبي. A believer, it means an adult believer, and an adult disbeliever, and a non-accountable child. What do you say about these three? فقال الجبائي. Al-Jubba'i said, now, interesting thing here, it doesn't say that Al-Jubba'i said to him, what do you mean? Just interesting thing. So it's possible some other words transpired here in this event. God knows, according to the words that's here, as if he just had an answer for such a question. So he said, Al-Mu'minu min ahli darajat, wal-kafiru min ahli al-halakat, was-sabiyyu min ahli najat. It's possible that they already had a context that it gives clarity to his question. Context that doesn't show in what's given to us in the report here. So he said to him, the believer is amongst the people of high ranks. The adult believer is amongst the people of high ranks. And the disbeliever is amongst the people of doom and perdition. And the child is amongst the saved. Meaning his rank is not as high as the rank of the adult believer. فقال الأشعري, and so Al-Ash'ari said, فإن أراد الصبي أن يرقى إلى أهل الدرجات. So if the child, Al-Ash'ari said to him, if the child wanted to elevate to the levels of the high ranks, like the adult believer, هل يمكن? Is it possible? فقال الجبائي لا. Al-Jubba'i said no. يقال له إن المؤمن إنما نال هذه الدرجة بالطاعة. بالطاعة. It is said to him that the adult believer has indeed merely acquired this status by his obedience. meaning by his lifetime, by the time he had to acquire deeds. وَلَيْسَ لَكَ مِثْلُهَا, and you, O child, do not have the likes of that. فَقَالَ الْأَشْعَرِي فَإِنْ قَالَ أَيِ الصَّبِيِّ التَّقْصِيرُ لَيْسَ مِنِّي. So Al-Ash'ari said, so if the child said, however, the deficiency is not my fault, فَلَوْ أَحْيَيْتَنِي كُنْتُ عَمِلْتُ مِنَ الطَّاعَاتِ كَعَمَلِ الْمُؤْمِنِ, had you given me the life, I would have done the works of that adult believer. I would have done like him. And be mindful also that it's possible here that what Shaykh is presenting is just in meaning, not the verbatim quote, but looks like it is the verbatim quote because it says intaha down there. Did he say ma nafsuhu? Let me just look. So he didn't say ma nafsuhu, qala Tajuddin as-Subki, ma nafsuhu. He didn't say quote verbatim. Although down at the bottom he did say intaha, end quote. So it's possible here Shaykh is presenting it in meaning. Also, in some of the different books, it is worded in different ways, and the story is the same. It's just each author is saying it in his own way. So the child would say, but it's not my fault. Had you enabled me to live, I would have done the obedience of the adult believer. قال الجبائي, Al-Jubba'i said, يقول له الله, God would say to him, كنت أعلم أنك لو بقيت لعصيت. But I knew that had you remained alive, you would have sinned. وَلَعُوقِبْتَ, and then you would have been punished. فَرَاعَيْتُ مَصْلَحَتَكَ, and so I did what is best for you. فَأَمَتْتُكَ قَبْلَ أَن تَنْتَهِيَ إِلَى سِنِّ التَّكْلِيفِ, and so I therefore made you die before you reached the age of religious responsibility. فَقَالَ لَهُ الْأَشْعَرِي, so then Al-Ash'ari said to him, رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ, may Allah accept from him, فَلَوْ قَالَ الْكَافِرُ يَا رَبِّ عَلِمْتَ حَالَهُ كَمَا عَلِمْتَ حَالِي. So if the disbeliever said, oh Lord, you knew his case as you knew my case, فَهَلَّا رَاعَيْتَ مَصْلَحَتِي مِثْلَهُ, so why not observe my welfare like his? فَانْقَطَعَ الْجُبَّائِ, and so Al-Jubba'i was silenced. Wallahu a'lam. How about we stop there? We fall short of the hour slightly, but now the author wants to change the subject. So I'd like to start the next subject at the top of the hour next time. Do you have any question I can answer for you?
Shaykh, I have a question.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Yes, one of you.
I'm trying to find out who is you again?
Al-Jubba'i, he's one of the heads of the Mu'tazila. One of the latter-day Mu'tazili so-called scholars. And Al-Ash'ari grew up under him in his house. And you know, Al-Ash'ari was under the influence of the Mu'tazila for some time. He was an advocate for the Mu'tazila for some time. And then Allah guided him to repent.
It's the same Ash'ari today.
Yes, the Imam Al-Ash'ari, yes.
MashaAllah.
Abu al-Hasan Al-Ash'ari.
Oh, okay, I learned something new today. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. The Wahhabis, they say, no, Al-Ash'ari repented. Al-Ash'ari repented. That's true, but not like what they're saying. Al-Ash'ari, what we learned is that he originally grew up in a Sunni home. And then, by the will of Allah, found himself under the influence of this Mu'tazili, and he became an advocate for the school of the Mu'tazila. And then he saw a dream, of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam commanding him to support the school of Ahlus Sunnah. So then he stopped advocating for the Mu'tazila, and then he saw another dream. Yeah, he started reciting Quran and some things like that. Then he saw another dream that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam commanded him to be active in his support of the school of Ahlus Sunnah, not just to like recite the Quran, to renounce Mu'tazila and recite the Quran, for example. So he became active opponent of the Mu'tazila, yani their worst nightmare. He became their worst nightmare.
Shaykh, can you spell his name for me, please?
Al-Jubba'i?
Yes.
Yeah. Al-Jubba'i is Al-Jubba Al-Jubba'i. So he's amongst the latter day Mu'tazila. When I say latter day here, I mean the latter day original Mu'tazila. Yani Mu'tazila appeared during the days of the successors of the companions, as you know, with Al-Hasan al-Bisri. We talked about Wasil, if you remember that one. Wasil, the Shaykh of the Mu'tazila. So like, when was that? Yani during the time of the successors of the companions. So Al-Jubba'i appeared towards closer to the year 300. This is yani when the scholars say, some of them say there were 20 sects of Mu'tazila. They say, didn't the Prophet say his nation would divide into 73 sects? 20 of those are Mu'tazili. One of those 20 is Al-Jubba'i's group, the Jubba'iyyah, towards the end of their run. There still came Mu'tazila later, like Zamakhshari came even hundreds of years later. Brother Jamal, you have a question?
Yes.
Yes,
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Okay, so my question is, of course, I understand the Aqidah point, but is it among the good manners for a person to express thanks for something that one does that he's obligated to do, but he does it for him?
I haven't learned.
Barakallahu.
MashaAllah. Ameen wa fikum. Yani, I haven't learned about that case in particular. Just all I know is that it is sunnah to thank the slaves of Allah. Man lam yashkuri nasa lam yashkuri Allah. Anyone who didn't thank the people didn't thank God. That's the hadith. And treating the people well, and even treating people better than what they deserve, yani, that's from the sunnah too. Because otherwise, what we learned is the one who did his duty doesn't deserve thanks. Please. Also, what makes it impossible that God has a duty? The fact that there's no way to punish him. So imposing an obligation on someone with no way to punish that one is meaningless. Someone told you better do this, you're gonna say, or what? You say, you just do it. You better. So what you're gonna tell them? Like, go kick rocks. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Yes.
What hadith is that anyone who didn't think the slave didn't thank God?
Who narrated that hadith? I'll have to review that.
Okay.
It's probably going to come up sooner or later in those Wednesday classes, though, where we go over the sins, because that's where I learned it from, that chapter, that portion of knowledge. Inshallah, I'll review in the meantime. Or if anyone knows, then you can help us out. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.